You wake up in a conversation about childhood, and everyone is trading memories. The birthday parties, the summers, the embarrassing moments their parents love to repeat at every family gathering. Someone recalls the time they got lost at the state fair. Someone else remembers learning to ride a bike, the specific afternoon, the exact tree they crashed into. They laugh. They fill in each other's details. They say, "Remember when?" like it's the easiest thing in the world. And you smile and nod. Maybe you contribute something small, a fact you know rather than something you actually remember. You know you had birthday parties. You've seen the photographs. But the experience itself, the felt sense of being there, the smell of the candles, the faces of the other children, it's not there. It's just not there. And underneath your smile, there's a strange kind of vertigo. Because when you reach back for your own childhood, you find not much. Fragments, moods, a handful of images that feel more like photographs you've seen than moments you lived. Flashes without context, feelings without stories attached to them. You wonder if something is wrong with you, if you're broken in some way other people aren't, if there's something you're supposed to remember but can't, something important hiding in all that emptiness. You wonder if everyone else is exaggerating, or if they really do have this access to their pasts that you lack. Here's what I want you to understand. The absence of memory is not nothing. It's telling you something. Sometimes it's telling you about the normal architecture of human development. Sometimes it's telling you about what wasn't there, and sometimes it's telling you about what was there. Something the mind decided you weren't ready to carry. The blankness where your childhood should be isn't a void. It's a story in itself. Let's begin with what most people don't know. Nearly everyone forgets most of their childhood. This isn't a disorder. It's not a sign of damage or pathology or repression. It's a fundamental feature of how human memory works. It's what brains do. Psychologists call it childhood amnesia, or sometimes infantile amnesia, and it describes the near universal inability of adults to retrieve episodic memories from before the age of about 3 or 4, along with the fragmented, sparse quality of memories from between ages 4 and 7. The average age of a person's earliest memory hovers around 3.5 years old. Everything before that, and most things for several years after, simply isn't there anymore. This has been consistently documented across studies spanning more than a century. Think about that for a moment. Really sit with it. You lived entire years, thousands of hours of experience, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for years on end. First words, first steps, first everything. You learned to walk, to talk, to recognize faces. You learned that objects continue to exist when you can't see them. You learned the sound of your mother's voice, the layout of your home, the taste of your favorite foods. You formed attachments, developed preferences, experienced joy and fear and frustration and wonder. Whole worlds of experience. And almost none of it is accessible to you now. This isn't because nothing was happening. Infants and young children form memories constantly. Researchers have demonstrated this again and again. Babies as young as 6 months can remember specific events for weeks. Toddlers can recall experiences from months earlier. Studies have shown that children as young as 2 can verbally report memories of events that occurred when they were only 1. Give a 9-month-old a toy and show them how to use it. Wait a month. They still remember. The memories were being made. They just didn't last. The question of why has occupied researchers for over a century. Sigmund Freud was the first to name the phenomenon, way back in 1905. He noticed that his patients, when asked to recall their earliest memories, could rarely retrieve anything from before age 6 to 8. He called this infantile amnesia. And being Freud, he had a theory. We repress early memories because of their inappropriately sexual content during early psychosexual development. The memories are there, he argued, but we've pushed them away. This explanation has not held up to scientific scrutiny. No experimental studies have found evidence to support Freud's ideas about childhood amnesia. The real reasons are far more interesting and far less dramatic. The first and most fundamental reason involves your hippocampus, the seahorse-shaped structure deep in your brain that serves as the central hub for forming and retrieving autobiographical memories. The memories that feel like yours, the ones that come with a sense of, I was there, this happened to me. The hippocampus doesn't just store memories like files in a cabinet. It binds together the different components of an experience, the sights, sounds, emotions, context, location, and timeline into a coherent episode that can later be retrieved as a unified whole. It's the brain's memory binding center, and without it functioning properly, experiences remain fragmented rather than becoming coherent memories. Here's the thing about the hippocampus. It isn't fully mature until somewhere between ages 3 and 5. Some researchers suggest it continues developing in important ways until age 7, and the broader memory systems it connects to continue maturing well into adolescence. In infancy, the neural circuits that allow you to encode an experience store it with its context intact, and later retrieve it as a coherent episode. Those circuits are still under construction. The scaffolding isn't finished. The connections between the hippocampus and other brain regions, particularly the prefrontal cortex that provides context and meaning, are still being established and strengthened. So while experiences are being processed, they're not being filed in a way that allows adult-style retrieval. The experiences happen. They even leave traces. But those traces can't be accessed the way adult memories can. Patricia Bauer, one of the leading researchers on childhood memory, likens it to having a brand new filing cabinet with no folders. Information comes in, but there's no system for organizing it, no way to find it later. The trisynaptic circuit of the hippocampus, a crucial 3-part pathway for memory formation, shows protracted development throughout childhood. Adult-like episodic memory only begins to emerge around age 6 and continues developing until adolescence, in parallel with the hippocampus reaching adult-like maturity. When a child is younger than 4, the brain systems that store events for future recall are still quite immature. They're not working as efficiently or effectively as they will in later childhood and adulthood. They're functional enough to support learning and short-term memory, but not robust enough to create the lasting, retrievable, autobiographical memories that adults take for granted. But the story gets more interesting than simple immaturity, because the developing hippocampus isn't just building, it's also, paradoxically, erasing. One of the most fascinating discoveries in memory research came from studies on neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons. Throughout infancy and early childhood, the hippocampus is producing new neurons at an extraordinarily high rate, particularly in a region called the dentate gyrus. This is one of only 2 regions in the adult brain where new neurons continue to be generated throughout life, though at much lower rates than in infancy. And while this might sound like a good thing for memory, more neurons should mean more memory capacity, right? The opposite is true. In a groundbreaking study published in the journal Science in 2014, researchers Sheena Jocelyn and Paul Frankland and their colleagues demonstrated something remarkable. Increasing neurogenesis after a memory was formed was actually sufficient to induce forgetting. The new neurons weren't adding to memory. They were disrupting it. Here's why. Successful memory retrieval relies on re-invoking patterns of neural activity that occurred at the time of encoding. Your brain stored the memory as a particular pattern of connections between neurons. To remember, you need to reactivate that same pattern. But the integration of new neurons into existing hippocampal circuits remodels those circuits. The new neurons form new input and output connections over the course of several weeks, and this remodeling incrementally reduces the likelihood that a given retrieval cue will successfully access a previously stored pattern. It's as if your brain is constantly renovating a house while you're trying to live in it. Each new addition disrupts the old structure. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. The rapid neurogenesis of early childhood is essential for the brain's flexibility, its ability to adapt and learn at the astounding rate that human children do. Human infants have to learn more, faster than the young of almost any other species. They have to acquire language, understand social structures, master physical skills, absorb culture, all in a few short years. The constant addition of new neurons keeps the brain plastic, responsive, capable of being shaped by whatever environment the child finds themselves in. But it comes at a cost. The memories being formed are continuously being overwritten, degraded, dissolved. The research on this is particularly elegant. In precocial species, animals like guinea pigs and daggers that are born relatively mature, able to walk and feed themselves within hours of birth, most of the granule cells in the hippocampus are generated before birth, not after. These animals don't show the same rapid postnatal neurogenesis that humans do. And those animals don't show infantile amnesia. Their early memories persist. Infant guinea pigs remember things. But here's where it gets really interesting. When researchers artificially increased neurogenesis in these species, after memory formation, they induced infantile amnesia where it wouldn't naturally occur. They made guinea pigs forget. Conversely, when researchers decreased neurogenesis in infant mice after they formed memories, it mitigated forgetting. The memories persisted longer than they otherwise would have. Less neurogenesis meant better memory retention. Human beings are altricial. We're born radically unfinished, with brains that will more than triple in size over the coming years. Our prolonged immaturity is what makes us so adaptable, so capable of learning from our particular environment, so able to become shaped by culture and language and relationship in ways that more precocial species cannot. We sacrifice early independence for later flexibility, and childhood amnesia is part of the price we pay for this extraordinary adaptability. So the first reason you can't remember being 3 years old is simply this: you couldn't. Not the way you remember being 13. The biological machinery wasn't there yet. And ironically, the very process that was making you so good at learning, the constant generation of new neurons, was simultaneously erasing the specific memories you were forming. But biology isn't the whole story. Memory isn't just a biological process. It's a social one, a cultural one, a linguistic one. And the development of autobiographical memory, the sense that you have a continuous story of your own life, depends on more than a mature hippocampus. It depends on language. Think about what a memory requires to feel like a memory. It needs to be located in time. It needs a sense of then and now. It needs a protagonist, a self who was there, and the understanding that this self is the same one who is doing the remembering. It needs a narrative structure, a beginning, middle, and end. It needs context, meaning, emotional significance. It needs to be something you can, at least in principle, put into words and share with another person. None of this is obvious to a young child. The conceptual framework for autobiographical memory develops gradually across the first 5 to 7 years of life, and it depends heavily on language acquisition. Before you have words, you have experiences, but you don't have a way to encode those experiences as stories. The narrative structure that makes a memory retrievable as a memory, that makes it possible to pull it out of storage and examine it, that structure requires the cognitive tools that language provides: time words, sequence words, personal pronouns that distinguish self from other, past tense verbs that distinguish now from then. Research has shown that pre-verbal memories don't readily lend themselves to verbal description. Under some circumstances, they can be described with language once it's acquired, but they weren't encoded through language, which limits how they can be accessed later. Researchers Catherine Nelson and Robin Fivish developed what they call a social cultural developmental theory of autobiographical memory. They argued that autobiographical memory doesn't fully emerge until around age 5, when multiple developmental components, language, narrative ability, understanding of time, theory of mind, and a subjective sense of self, have all reached sufficient levels to support the encoding, retention, and later retrieval of truly autobiographical memories. Before this, children have episodic memories, but not autobiographical memories in the full sense. They remember things happening, but not in a way that's organized around a continuous self moving through time. And crucially, those cognitive tools are taught. They're taught through one of the most underappreciated processes in early development: parent-child reminiscing, starting in toddlerhood. Virtually as soon as children begin to talk at around 16 to 18 months, parents begin having conversations with children about past events. At first, children make only fleeting references to the past. They might mention something that happened without context, without timeline, without elaboration. But parents respond. They ask questions. They fill in details. They provide structure. Remember when we went to the beach? Remember how we drove in the car for a long time? And then we got there and you saw the water. Remember how the waves were so big? You were scared at first, but then you had so much fun building sandcastles with Daddy. And remember the seagull that tried to eat your sandwich? These conversations might seem trivial, just parents chatting with their kids, but they're actually training the child's mind to do something new, to construct narratives about personal experience, to organize events in sequence, to identify what matters about an experience, what makes it worth remembering and retelling, to connect emotions to events, to see themselves as the protagonist of their own ongoing story. The child is learning that experiences can become stories, and that stories can be remembered and shared, and that their life is made up of such stories. Researchers have discovered that parents vary significantly in what's called their reminiscing style. Some parents are highly elaborative. They provide rich details, ask open-ended questions, help the child place events in sequence, add emotional content and context, follow the child's contributions with related comments, and weave the child's responses into an ongoing narrative. They say things like, "Yes, and then what happened? How did that make you feel? That was the same day we saw the rainbow, remember?" Other parents are less elaborative. They ask simple yes or no questions, repeat the same questions without building on the answers. Don't add emotional content. Don't follow the child's contributions. They might say, "Did you have fun at the beach? Did you? Did you have fun?" And when the child says yes, the conversation ends. And this difference matters enormously for the development of autobiographical memory. 30 years of research has established that children of highly elaborative parents develop more detailed, more coherent autobiographical memories. They can recall earlier events. Their earliest memories stretch further back in time. They provide more elaborate memory narratives when interviewed independently. The effects are robust and well documented, and these effects persist. In one remarkable study, mothers were trained to be more elaborative when their children were around 2.5 years old. Just 4 one-hour sessions, teaching them about asking open-ended questions and following their children's contributions. The children of these trained mothers showed enhanced autobiographical memory compared to a control group. And when researchers followed up years later, at age 11 and again at age 15, the differences were still there. Adolescents whose mothers had received elaborative reminiscing training over a decade earlier still showed enhanced memory and narrative skills compared to the control group. Think about what this means. The memories you can access from your childhood are not simply recordings of what happened to you. They're reconstructions, co-created initially in conversation with the people who raised you. Your mother or father or caregiver sat with you and helped you learn that experiences can become stories, and that stories can be remembered. They provided the scaffolding for your developing autobiographical memory system. Through shared reminiscing, we reinterpret and reevaluate our past experiences in ways that create personal meaning. Autobiographical reminiscing is a critical process in how we come to understand who we are in the world. If those conversations didn't happen, if no one helped you practice turning experience into narrative, then your autobiographical memory system developed differently. The framework wasn't built as robustly, and the memories from those early years are less accessible now. Research has shown that the age of a person's earliest memory can be predicted by their mother's reminiscing style during their early childhood. Mothers who used a greater ratio of elaborations to repetitions when their children were between 2 and 4 years old had children who, as adolescents reported earlier first memories than children of less elaborative mothers. The correlation is direct and documented. This is one reason why childhood amnesia looks different across cultures. Research by psychologist Chi Wang and others has shown that the age of earliest memory varies systematically between cultures. People from Western, individualist cultures typically report earlier memories, often around 3.5 years old, compared to people from East Asian cultures who report earliest memories around 4.5 to 5 years old. The difference amounts to about 6 months on average, but it's consistent and robust across studies. Why? Because Western cultures tend to emphasize individual autonomy and emotional expression, which translates into more elaborative reminiscing focused on the child's personal experience, their unique feelings and reactions, their individual role in events. Parents in these cultures are more likely to use detailed descriptions and open-ended questions to construct rich narratives when reminiscing with their preschool-aged children. East Asian cultures, with their greater emphasis on social harmony and group relationships, tend to produce reminiscing conversations that are less focused on the individual child's inner experience and more focused on social roles and relationships. The narratives are there, but they're structured differently. Not only does the average age of earliest memory vary between cultures, but the nature of those memories differs too. Western childhood memories tend to be self-focused and emotionally detailed, while East Asian childhood memories are more generic and focused on social context rather than individual experience. Neither approach is better. They're different, and they produce different shapes of autobiographical memory. Here's the point. Your ability to remember your childhood doesn't depend only on what happened to you. It depends on whether anyone helped you remember, whether anyone taught you to construct a narrative self through the practice of shared reminiscing. The social scaffolding matters as much as the biology. Now let's move into territory that will feel more personal for some of you, because so far we've been discussing normal childhood amnesia, the universal forgetting that comes from immature brains and developing cognitive systems. This is the forgetting that affects everyone, regardless of what kind of childhood they had. But some people experience something beyond this, a forgetting that extends further into childhood than it should, an erasure that feels less like the normal fog of early years and more like a deliberate blankness, entire years that seem to have simply vanished, a childhood that feels like it happened to someone else or didn't happen at all. If this describes you, I want to tread carefully, because what I'm about to describe may resonate in ways that feel uncomfortable, and I want to honor both the complexity of this topic and your own experience of it. There's another reason people can't remember their childhood. Nothing was there to remember. Not nothing happened, but nothing memorable. Nothing that registered as significant to a developing self. Childhood emotional neglect is a term that names something many people can't quite articulate. It's not about what happened to you. It's about what didn't happen. The parent who was physically present but emotionally absent. The household where no one asked how your day was and meant it and waited for the answer and responded to what you said. The childhood where your feelings were invisible or inconvenient or simply never noticed. The home where you learned early that your inner experience didn't matter to anyone, so it stopped mattering to you. Emotional neglect doesn't leave marks the way abuse does. There are no bruises to photograph, no incidents to report, no dramatic events to point to. It's the absence of something that should have been there. Attention, attunement, the sense that your inner experience mattered to someone. It's the dog that didn't bark, the conversation that never happened, the emotional responsiveness that was never there. This is different from occasional parental inattention, which every child experiences. This is a pattern, a chronic absence of emotional engagement that shapes the developing child's expectations about themselves and the world. And here's what's crucial for memory. Autobiographical memory develops through emotional engagement, through moments that carry meaning, through experiences that someone helped you process, narrate, integrate. Remember those parent-child reminiscing conversations we discussed in homes where emotional neglect is present? Those conversations either don't happen or happen without emotional depth. No one asks what you felt about things. No one helps you make meaning of your experiences. No one reflects your inner world back to you. The experiences happen, but they're not processed through the social emotional matrix that would make them memorable. A child whose emotions are consistently ignored learns to ignore them too. A child whose experiences are never reflected back, never talked about, never wondered over, never treated as significant, learns that experiences don't have significance. They pass through without being encoded as memorable. It's not that nothing happened. It's that nothing happened that the child's mind registered as worth keeping. Psychologist Robin Fivush and others have demonstrated that autobiographical memories are built on emotional content. Early memories that persist tend to be emotionally significant. They carried personal meaning. They were connected to the developing sense of self. Research shows that later memories in childhood have more emotional content than earlier memories and are rated as more meaningful, vivid, and significant. Emotional significance is a key factor in what gets remembered. In homes where a child's emotional experience was ignored or dismissed, that sense of self develops differently. The memories that would normally crystallize around emotional significance don't form in the same way. There's less there to remember, not because the years were empty, but because the child was trained to experience them as if they were. One therapist describes it this way: rather than paying attention to how her food tasted, what she liked and didn't like, the child learned to track the smallest micro-expressions on her mother's face so that she could try to mold herself into what she thought her mother needed her to be. This intense focus on caretaking left little room to encode memories of her own experiences. Her childhood became a blur of moments dedicated to pleasing others, leaving behind a fragmented narrative when attempting to recall her early years. Heinz Kohut, the psychoanalyst who developed self-psychology, described the importance of what he called the gleam in the mother's eye, the experience of being seen, valued, reflected by a caregiver. Children need this prizing attention to form a sense of themselves as people with valid feelings, thoughts, preferences, and needs. Without early, reliable mirroring by an emotionally attuned parent, children often grow into adults who feel uncertain about who they are and who have fewer accessible memories from which to construct a sense of self. The gaps in memory that come with childhood emotional neglect can leave a person with the uncomfortable feeling that they don't really know who they are. If you grew up in an emotionally neglectful environment, your forgetting is not just neurological, it's relational. It's the absence of a witness, the absence of someone who helped you know that your life was happening, that it mattered, that you mattered. This is a painful thing to realize, because it means the blankness isn't your fault. But it also means something was missing that you can never get back. You can't go back and make someone notice you. You can't go back and install the conversations that would have helped you remember. What you can do is begin to be your own witness now, to start treating your experiences as worthy of attention, reflection, memory. The capacity to do this isn't gone. It was just never fully developed, and it can still be grown. But there's another kind of forgetting, one that works actively rather than passively, one where the memory was formed, and then the mind decided to make it inaccessible. We call this dissociative amnesia. Let me be careful here, because this territory has been badly muddied by controversy, bad therapy, and pseudo-scientific claims. The so-called memory wars of the 1990s did enormous damage, with some therapists using suggestive techniques that created false memories of abuse that never occurred. Lives were destroyed. Families were torn apart. The American Psychiatric Association has appropriately cautioned against cases of adults recalling events of abuse from very early ages without corroborating evidence. Memory is malleable, suggestible, constructive. It's not a video recording. It's a reconstruction that can be influenced by suggestion, leading questions, and the desire to make sense of one's experience. It's possible to form vivid memories of events that never happened. But the phenomenon of dissociative amnesia itself is real, documented, and recognized in clinical literature, including the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The challenge is distinguishing genuine dissociative amnesia from false memories created through suggestion. Dissociative amnesia is the inability to recall important autobiographical information, usually of a traumatic or stressful nature, that goes far beyond ordinary forgetting. The forgotten information would normally be part of conscious awareness. It's your own history, but it's inaccessible. The DSM describes several forms. Localized amnesia involves being unable to recall events during a specific period of time, usually related to trauma or stress. Someone might forget the months or years of being abused as a child, or the days spent in intense combat. The amnesia may not manifest for hours, days, or longer after the traumatic period. Selective amnesia involves forgetting some, but not all of the events within a certain time period. This typically happens in response to overwhelming experiences, particularly those that are chronic, severe, and that occur during childhood. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, witnessing violence, living in prolonged states of terror or unpredictability. The more severe the trauma, the more severe the amnesia tends to be. The mind, faced with experiences it cannot integrate, does something remarkable. It walls them off, not through a conscious choice, but through an automatic protective mechanism. Dissociation involves a disconnection from one's thoughts, feelings, or surroundings as a coping strategy to endure overwhelming experiences. Children enduring the stress of emotional neglect or abuse often adapt by living disconnected from their inner world, which contributes to childhood memory gaps. The memories are encoded, but they're encoded in a fragmented, disorganized way that makes later retrieval difficult or impossible. According to classical theories of dissociation dating back to Pierre Janet and Sigmund Freud, unresolved traumatic memories are disconnected from conscious awareness as a way of avoiding the recall of overwhelming experiences. The mind protects itself by creating blind spots, areas of experience that are inaccessible to conscious recall. The key word there is fragmented. Traumatic memories don't necessarily disappear entirely. They get broken apart, the sensory components separated from the narrative, the emotional charge split from the context. The smell of a particular cologne might remain while the person who wore it vanishes from memory. The feeling of terror might persist without any story to explain it. The sound of a particular kind of voice might trigger panic with no accompanying image, and these fragments can continue to influence behavior, emotion, and bodily experience without the person being able to consciously remember their source. This is where the concept of implicit memory becomes essential. There are two fundamental types of memory. Explicit memory is what we usually mean when we talk about memory. Conscious recall of past events, the internal experience of remembering. When you recall your last birthday party, you know you're remembering. There's a subjective sense of traveling back in time, of re-experiencing something that happened before. You can describe it in words. You know it's a memory. Implicit memory is different. It's memory that influences behavior and experience without conscious awareness. It's been described as retention without remembering, as non-declarative memory. Procedural memory, how to ride a bike, is one type. You don't consciously remember learning to balance, you just can. Emotional conditioning is another type. The way a particular song might make you feel sad without you knowing why. The way certain situations trigger anxiety that seems to come from nowhere. Explicit memory requires a mature hippocampus and the neural circuits that connect it to other brain regions. Implicit memory does not. Implicit memory relies on brain structures that are fully developed before birth. This means that experiences from very early childhood, including traumatic experiences, can be encoded implicitly, even when they can't be encoded explicitly. Your body can learn fear responses, avoidance patterns, and emotional reactions before your brain is capable of forming conscious memories of what caused them. Implicit memories are stored in the survival part of the brain responsible for fight, flight, and freeze responses. They influence behavior and emotional responses without conscious awareness. These memories are often formed through experiences that we may not remember consciously, such as early childhood experiences or traumatic events. They can trigger automatic emotional reactions or behaviors without our awareness, and this creates a strange situation. Your body can remember what your mind cannot. A child who is terrified by a man with a particular type of face may grow into an adult who feels inexplicably anxious around men with similar features, without any conscious memory of the original experience. A person who is hurt in a particular type of room may feel their heart rate rise when they enter a similar space, with no idea why. Someone whose caregiver was unpredictable may feel chronic anxiety in relationships, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, without being able to trace this to any specific remembered experience. If you felt unsafe during infancy and that period of danger coincided with a terrible storm, now when a strong wind blows, you may feel your heart rate rise, your palms sweat, and your breath quicken, without remembering the original event. All you know is that when the wind kicks up, it stirs strong emotions. The memory is there. It's just not in the form of a story. It's in the form of a sensation, an emotion, an impulse, disconnected from any narrative that would explain it. When an implicit memory is triggered, and there's no explicit memory to help contextualize it, the body doesn't know the experience is a memory. It feels like it's happening now. The past intrudes into the present without announcing itself as the past. This is what researchers mean when they talk about the body keeping the score, a phrase popularized by psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk. Traumatic experiences, particularly those from early childhood, can leave lasting imprints on the nervous system while remaining inaccessible to conscious recall. The body holds what the mind has set aside. The terror and helplessness might have been experienced at the same time as everyday things, a particular sound, a smell, a quality of light. And now those everyday things trigger the terror, seemingly out of nowhere. Integrated memories consist of emotional pieces, sensory pieces, and story pieces all connected together. For those who have endured childhood trauma and neglect, these pieces get disconnected and some get lost. When a memory is integrated, it tends to feel safer when triggered, even if it's unpleasant. But fragmented memories often show up as emotional or somatic flashbacks. The feelings and sensations are there, but the story of what happened is not. This can be confusing and overwhelming. Research has shown that PTSD patients exhibit enhanced implicit memory for trauma-related material, even when their explicit recall is impaired. The body learns what the mind cannot consciously access. Now, I need to be clear about something. The existence of dissociative amnesia does not mean that all forgotten memories are repressed trauma. The recovered memory movement of the 1990s caused enormous harm by convincing people they had experienced traumas that never actually occurred. Memory is malleable, suggestible, constructive. It's possible to form vivid memories of events that never happened, especially when suggestive questioning or therapeutic techniques are involved. But it's also true that genuine traumatic amnesia exists. Studies have documented that a substantial proportion of people who experience childhood abuse report periods of partial or complete amnesia for the abuse, with earlier age of onset correlated with greater levels of amnesia. The mind can protect itself by making certain experiences unavailable to consciousness. And for some people, the inability to remember childhood is not just normal developmental forgetting. It's an adaptive response to what was there. If you have reason to suspect this might be true for you, not from speculation or suggestion, but from other evidence in your life, unexplained symptoms, fragmented sensory intrusions, reactions that don't match your understood history, a body that seems to know things your mind doesn't, then you deserve support from a qualified professional who can help you explore this safely. The goal is not necessarily to recover memories. Memory recovery is not always possible, and attempts to force it through suggestive techniques can create false memories. The goal is integration, finding ways to live with what your body holds whether or not your mind ever puts words to it. Let's step back and look at this from another angle. Because memory isn't just about individual experience. It's about the self that does the remembering. To have autobiographical memory, you need to have a self. And the self isn't something you're born with. It's something that develops. The cognitive self, the understanding that you are a continuous being who exists across time, emerges gradually during the toddler years. Before this, there is experience, but there's no one home to file it as personal history. A baby has sensations, perceptions, emotions, but not yet a sense of I who is having them. Not yet a continuous entity who existed yesterday and will exist tomorrow. The mirror self-recognition that emerges around 18 to 24 months is an early marker of self-awareness. The realization that the image in the mirror is me. Between 16 and 24 months of age, children will begin to touch a place on their face that has been surreptitiously marked with rouge when they see themselves in a mirror. They recognize themselves. But this is just the beginning, the full-fledged autobiographical self, the one who can say, I remember when I was 5, and understand that this I is the same person who exists now, doesn't consolidate until significantly later. Researchers have argued that for the first 5 to 7 years of life, children lack what's called autonoetic consciousness, the ability to recognize that the source of their mental experience is a representation of a past event, to mentally travel back in time and re-experience something while knowing that they are remembering. Without this, there can be no auto in episodic memories, no autobiographical memory as adults experience it. Researcher Patricia Bauer and others have demonstrated that the volume and quality of young children's autobiographical memories is predicted by the development of their self-concept. Children with stronger self-knowledge have more specific, more detailed memories of their past. The self and memory develop together, each supporting the other. Research demonstrates that the volume of 3 to 6-year-olds' specific autobiographical memories is predicted by both the volume of their self-knowledge and their capacity for self-referential processing. There's a bidirectional relationship between self and memory. Each feeds into the other. This creates a bootstrap problem. You need a self to encode self-referential memories. But your self is partially built from those very memories. The spiral of development requires both to emerge together, each supporting the other's growth. And this is why the social context matters so much. Parents who engage in elaborative reminiscing aren't just helping children remember specific events. They're helping children construct a self, a continuous sense of, I was the one who went to the beach. I was the one who was scared of the waves. I am still that same person now. Without this scaffolding, the self develops differently. The memories don't anchor in the same way. And later in life, reaching back for those years, you find less there, because there was less there. Not less experience, less self to claim it as its own. This connects back to emotional neglect in an important way. Children need to be seen to develop a sense of self. They need their experiences reflected back to them. They need someone to say, in effect, you are real. What you feel matters. You are a person whose life is happening. Without that mirroring, the self remains fuzzy, uncertain, unanchored, and so do the memories that would have been organized around it. Now, let me speak to something that often remains unspoken in these conversations. The grief. If you're listening to this because you can't remember your childhood, you already know what I'm about to say. The forgetting feels like a loss, like you've been robbed of something other people have. The stories they tell at family gatherings, the childhood photos that trigger vivid recall for them, but nothing for you. The assumed common experience of having a past that's accessible. You sit there while your siblings or friends reminisce in detail about events you supposedly shared, and you have nothing. Or worse, you have a vague sense that their version isn't quite right, but you can't say why, because you can't remember either. You feel like a ghost at your own history. That loss is real, and it deserves to be mourned. Whether your forgetting comes from normal developmental processes, from emotional neglect, from trauma, or from some combination of all three, you are missing something. Access to your own history. The feeling of continuity with yourself as a child. The ground that other people seem to stand on when they say, "I've always been this way," or "Even as a kid, I loved," or "I remember exactly when I realized." You don't have that, and it matters. I want you to know that you're allowed to grieve this, that grief doesn't require certainty about what was lost. You don't need to know exactly why you can't remember in order to feel sad that you can't. The absence is real regardless of its cause. And I want you to know that the grief can coexist with something else. The understanding that forgetting was, at some level, adaptive, that your brain was doing its job, protecting you, developing you, getting you through. The forgetting wasn't malicious. It was functional. Every type of forgetting we've discussed served some purpose. Neurogenesis made you adaptable. The lack of narrative scaffolding reflected your developmental stage. Dissociation protected you from what you couldn't process. Both things can be true. You can grieve your lost history while honoring the processes that led to its absence. You can feel the pain of not knowing while recognizing that perhaps, at the time, not knowing was exactly what you needed. There's something else I want to address. The question of what it means that early memories are inaccessible, but may still influence you. This is the paradox that researchers are still working to fully understand. The memories you cannot recall can still shape your behavior, your emotions, your relationships, your very sense of self. The brain that rapidly forgets is the same brain that is being fundamentally shaped by its experiences. It has been widely documented that early life events, such as neglect or aversive experiences, can greatly impact adult behavior and may predispose individuals to various psychopathologies, even when those specific experiences cannot be consciously recalled. This is sometimes called the paradox of infantile amnesia. How can a brain that rapidly forgets exert such long-lasting influence? Research consistently shows that early childhood adversity, abuse, neglect, toxic stress has lasting effects on mental health and physical health, even when the specific experiences cannot be consciously recalled. Children raised in depriving environments show alterations in brain structure and function that persist into adulthood, including changes in the hippocampus itself, the very structure responsible for memory. Studies have found reduced hippocampal volume in adults who experienced childhood maltreatment. How can experiences you don't remember still affect you? Because explicit, conscious memory is only one way that experience shapes the brain. Implicit learning, procedural memory, emotional conditioning, attachment patterns. All of these operate below the threshold of consciousness. Your brain learned things in those early years. It formed expectations about safety and danger, about whether needs will be met, about whether the world is trustworthy, about whether you are worthy of care. Those expectations don't require narrative memory to persist. Attachment theory provides a powerful framework here. In the first years of life, you formed working models of relationships based on how your caregivers responded to you. If they were consistently responsive, you learned that relationships are safe and that you're worthy of care. If they were inconsistent, neglectful, or frightening, you learned something else, something that still operates in your relationships today, whether or not you can remember a single specific interaction that taught you. This can be disorienting, to sense that something is wrong, that patterns keep repeating, that certain emotions keep emerging without being able to trace them back to their origin, to feel the weight of a history you cannot access, to wonder why you react the way you do, why certain situations trigger you, why you can't seem to break patterns that make no sense. But it can also be freeing, because it means that understanding why isn't necessary for healing. You don't need to remember the original experience in order to work with its effects. Therapy, particularly somatic and body-based approaches, can address the implicit traces of early experience without requiring explicit recall. The body that holds the score can also release it. Let me speak now about what can be done. Not to recover lost memories, that path is fraught with problems, but to work with the situation you find yourself in. First, if you're concerned that your memory gaps might reflect something more than normal childhood amnesia, consider working with a therapist who specializes in trauma and dissociation. Not to dig for buried memories, but to create a safe space where whatever is there can emerge naturally, if it's going to. A good therapist won't try to convince you of anything. They'll help you develop the internal resources to tolerate whatever arises. Sometimes fragments surface, sometimes they don't. Either outcome is valid. Second, begin the practice of treating your present experiences as worthy of memory. If you grew up without someone to witness your life, you can learn to witness it yourself. Journal, reflect, create deliberate practices of reminiscing about your own recent past. Notice what you felt today, what mattered, what you want to remember. This won't give you back what's gone, but it can build the capacity that wasn't developed. You can become your own elaborative parent, helping yourself construct narratives about your experience. Third, focus on integration rather than excavation. Whether your early years hold trauma or emptiness or normal developmental forgetting, the work is the same. Bringing together the fragments of your experience into a more coherent whole. This isn't about recovering facts. It's about developing a relationship with yourself that includes compassion for the child you were. Even if you can't remember being that child, you know that child existed. You can extend care backward in time, even without memories. Fourth, consider what your body knows. If you have unexplained physical symptoms, emotional reactions that seem disproportionate, patterns that repeat without making sense, these might be implicit memories speaking in the only language they have. Body-based therapies like somatic experiencing, sensor-emotor psychotherapy, and trauma-informed yoga can help you develop awareness of these signals without requiring you to translate them into narrative. The goal isn't to figure out what happened. It's to help your nervous system feel safe enough to release what it's been holding. Fifth, work on expanding your window of tolerance. Trauma and neglect often leave the nervous system dysregulated, stuck in hypervigilance, or shut down, unable to tolerate the normal ups and downs of life. Practices that regulate the nervous system, mindfulness, breathwork, safe physical activity, nurturing relationships, can help restore the flexibility that was compromised. This won't bring back memories, but it will change your relationship to not knowing. And sixth, give yourself permission to not know. Our culture values self-knowledge, self-understanding, the coherent life story. We're supposed to know where we came from, what made us who we are, how our past connects to our present. But not all lives are coherent. Not all pasts are recoverable. You can live a meaningful life without full access to your early years. You can heal without remembering what wounded you. You can become who you want to be without knowing exactly who you were. The absence of memory doesn't mean the absence of a valid self. It means your self was built differently, maybe less from remembered stories and more from something else. Resilience, perhaps. Adaptation. The ability to keep going without the maps that other people seem to have. Some people spend their whole lives chasing memories they'll never recover. They dig and search and analyze, hoping that if they could just remember, everything would make sense. But sense can be made without memory. Healing can happen without knowing. The story you tell going forward doesn't depend on perfect knowledge of what came before. There's wisdom in the Buddhist concept of beginner's mind, approaching life as if everything is fresh, unknown, without the weight of established narrative. For those of us who can't remember our childhoods, this isn't a spiritual practice. It's the situation we find ourselves in, and it can become a gift if we let it. You aren't defined by what you can remember. You aren't limited by what you can't access. The past has shaped you. That's undeniable. But the shape is present now, workable now, changeable now. You don't need to excavate the origins to work with the results. The inability to remember your childhood doesn't define you. It's part of your story. But your story is still being written. The self you are now is not dependent on perfect continuity with the self you were then. Identities can be constructed forward, not just traced backward. And there's something profound in the very fact that you're asking this question, that you're turning toward the blankness rather than away from it, that you're willing to sit with the discomfort of not knowing and to wonder what it means. That curiosity, that willingness to look, is itself a form of healing. It's treating yourself as worthy of understanding. It's witnessing yourself, perhaps for the first time. Many people live their whole lives avoiding the empty places in their memory, filling them with busyness, substances, distraction, anything to avoid the vertigo of not knowing. The fact that you're here, exploring this, sitting with the discomfort, suggests a kind of courage that deserves acknowledgement. You may never remember your childhood. The neural traces may be genuinely gone, overwritten by neurogenesis, never properly encoded in the first place, or walled off in ways that won't be breached. And that's okay. That can be okay, because you can remember who you are now. You can notice your own experience today. You can build memories going forward, treating each day as worthy of attention and narrative. You can learn to be present for your own life in a way that perhaps no one was present for you before. The past is only one ground to stand on. The present is another. And from here, watching yourself with the attention you may never have received, you can grow. The blankness where your childhood should be is not a void. It's not evidence that you're broken. It's part of being human. The cost of having a brain that prioritized flexibility over continuity, or the scar tissue of experiences that were too much to hold, or the result of a relational environment that didn't provide what you needed. Whatever the cause, the blankness is yours. It's part of your landscape. And from this uncertain ground, this place of not knowing, a life can still be built. A self can still emerge. A future can still unfold. You are more than what you remember. You always were. There's something I haven't addressed yet that deserves attention. The question of false certainty. When we can't remember something, there's a natural human tendency to fill in the gap. We construct explanations. We adopt narratives. We decide what must have happened based on how we feel now. And this can be dangerous. If you feel chronically anxious, it's tempting to conclude that something terrible must have happened to you. If you struggle in relationships, it's tempting to assume your childhood must have been neglectful. If you have gaps in your memory, it's tempting to believe those gaps are hiding trauma. Maybe they are, but maybe they aren't. The absence of memory is not itself evidence of trauma. Normal childhood amnesia creates gaps in everyone's memory. The brain's developmental trajectory creates gaps. Cultural and familial differences in reminiscing create gaps. Not all gaps are meaningful. Not all blanks are hiding something. I want to hold space for uncertainty here, for the possibility that you simply don't remember, because brains don't remember early childhood very well. And that's the whole explanation. For the possibility that your childhood was unremarkable, neither particularly good nor particularly bad, and that's why it left so little trace. Not everyone who can't remember their childhood is a trauma survivor. Not everyone who struggles emotionally had something terrible happen to them. Sometimes brains just develop differently. Sometimes families just don't reminisce. Sometimes the explanation is boring, and that can be its own kind of difficult. Because if nothing dramatic explains your struggles, then what does? If you can't point to a wound, how do you explain why things are hard? The answer is that explanations aren't always available. You can struggle without knowing why. You can feel broken without a story to account for the breaking. You can be shaped by forces you'll never identify. This is uncomfortable, but it's honest. What I want to caution against is the premature certainty that often fills the void of not knowing. Therapy culture, self-help books, social media, all of these can encourage people to adopt dramatic narratives about their childhoods based on thin evidence. I can't remember, so I must be repressing something terrible. This logic is seductive, but flawed. If you're exploring your past, do so with humility. Hold your hypotheses loosely. Be willing to discover that the explanation is more mundane than you imagined, or more complex, or different altogether. The goal isn't to construct a story that feels satisfying. The goal is to find what's actually true, or to make peace with not knowing. Let me also address something practical: the relationship between memory and identity. We live in a culture that places enormous value on narrative identity. We're expected to have a story about who we are, where we came from, how we became ourselves. Job interviews ask about our backgrounds. Therapists ask about our childhoods. Dating partners want to know our history. We're constantly asked to perform coherent selfhood through narrative. For those of us who can't access our past, this creates a particular kind of social difficulty. What do you say when someone asks about your childhood and you genuinely don't know? How do you explain yourself without a story to point to? How do you participate in the normal human activity of exchanging histories when yours is largely blank? There are no easy answers here, but there are approaches that can help. One is simply honesty. I don't remember much of my childhood is a complete sentence. It doesn't require explanation or justification. You don't owe anyone a detailed account of your past. The people who matter will accept this. The people who can't accept it aren't owed your vulnerability anyway. Another is focusing on the present. Who you are now is just as real and valid as who you were then. Your values, your choices, your relationships, your work, these are all legitimate foundations for identity. You don't need to trace everything back to childhood origins. You can simply be who you are, rooted in the present, building toward the future. A third is learning to tolerate the uncertainty. This is perhaps the hardest. We want to know. We want explanations. We want the sense of coherence that comes from understanding our own history. But coherence isn't always available, and the pursuit of it can become its own trap, an endless excavation that never reaches bottom, an explanation seeking that substitutes for actually living. There's a kind of freedom in letting go of the need to know, in saying, I don't remember, and that's okay. I am who I am, regardless of what I can account for. My life is valid, even if I can't explain it. This isn't resignation, it's acceptance. And from acceptance, paradoxically, more often comes peace than from endless searching. Let me say something about the people in your life. If you can't remember your childhood, you may have family members who can. Parents, siblings, relatives who are there, who remember things, who have stories to tell. Your relationship to these people and their memories is complicated. On one hand, they can offer information you don't have. They can tell you stories, show you photographs, fill in details that might otherwise be lost. For some people, this is helpful, a way of constructing a past through others' memories. On the other hand, their memories are not your memories. What they recall may not match your experience. The story they tell may be filtered through their own perspective, their own needs, their own relationship with the past. They may remember a happy childhood you experienced as empty. They may deny difficulties you feel in your bones. They may have narratives that serve them but don't serve you. Be cautious about outsourcing your history. Other people's memories can supplement your own, but they can't replace them. You don't have to accept someone else's version of your childhood as truth. You're allowed to trust your own felt sense, even when it contradicts what others remember. And if your family's memories are painful or gaslighting or simply unhelpful, you're allowed to stop seeking them. You don't have to keep asking questions that yield answers that hurt you. You can let the past be unknown rather than known badly. Some people find closure through family conversations about the past. Others find only confusion or re-traumatization. There's no single right approach. The only guideline is protect yourself. Your healing doesn't require anyone else's participation or validation. I want to address one more thing: the question of whether memory even matters. There's a philosophical argument to be made that memories are overrated. They're reconstructions, not recordings. They change every time we access them. They're shaped by our present circumstances, our current needs, our evolving sense of self. The childhood you'd remember, if you could remember it, wouldn't be an objective record of what happened. It would be a story, constructed now, serving present purposes. In some ways, having no access to childhood memories frees you from the tyranny of a fixed narrative. You're not constrained by, "I've always been this way." You're not limited by, "That's just who I am because of what happened." You're more free to invent yourself, to change, to grow, precisely because you don't have a heavy past weighing you down. This isn't meant to minimize the loss. Of course, it matters what happened to you. Of course, your childhood shaped you. Of course, there's grief in not being able to access your own history. But alongside that grief, there can be recognition of what's possible when you're not defined by memory. You get to decide who you are, not based on what you remember, but based on what you choose. Not based on where you came from, but based on where you're going. The past made you, yes, but it doesn't have to own you, especially when you can't remember it anyway. Some of the most free people I've known are those who let go of needing to understand their origins. They accept that they were shaped by forces they can't identify, and they turn their attention to shaping themselves now. They stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and start asking, who do I want to become? The energy that could go toward excavation goes instead toward construction. This isn't for everyone. Some people need to know, and that's valid too. But if you've searched and searched and the past remains opaque, consider whether it's time to stop digging. Consider whether not knowing might be workable after all. Consider whether your identity can be built on present values and future aspirations rather than past events. You didn't choose to forget your childhood. That happened to you. Through biology, through circumstance, through protective mechanisms you didn't consciously deploy. But you can choose what to do with the forgetting. You can choose whether it defines you or not. You can choose whether to spend your life searching for what's lost or building with what you have. Both choices are legitimate. Both paths can lead to healing. The question is, which one serves you better, given who you are and what you need? I've said a lot in this exploration. Let me try to distill it. Childhood amnesia is universal. Everyone forgets most of their early years due to brain immaturity and ongoing neurogenesis. This is normal, biological, and doesn't indicate any problem beyond this universal forgetting. Some people experience more extensive memory loss due to emotional neglect, childhoods without the relational scaffolding that builds autobiographical memory in the first place, and some experience dissociative amnesia, the mind's protective walling off of traumatic or overwhelming experiences. These different causes require different responses, but share something important. The forgetting happened for a reason. Whether that reason was developmental, protective, or relational, your brain wasn't randomly deleting memories. It was doing what brains do, prioritizing, adapting, protecting. The memories you can't access may still influence you through implicit channels. Your body, your emotional patterns, your relational templates. All of these can carry traces of experiences you can't consciously recall. This can be addressed through therapy and body-based approaches without necessarily recovering explicit memories. And finally, not knowing is workable. You can build a meaningful identity, heal from wounds you can't name, and live fully in the present without access to your past. Memory isn't the only foundation for selfhood. You have other grounds to stand on. If there's one thing I hope you take from this, it's this. You're not broken because you can't remember. You're human. And being human means navigating uncertainty, including uncertainty about your own history. The blankness where your childhood should be isn't an indictment of you. It's not evidence that you're damaged or defective or missing something essential. It's evidence that you're a human being with a human brain that did exactly what it was supposed to do, even if that left you with less access to your past than you'd like. From here, from this present moment, you can do anything. You can seek understanding or let go of needing it. You can explore your history or turn toward your future. You can grieve what's lost or embrace what's possible. All of these are valid. All of these can lead somewhere good. What you can't do is go back and make yourself remember what your brain has let go of. That chapter is closed, but the book is still being written, and you're the one holding the pen. You may never remember your childhood, but you can remember this moment, and this one, and this one. Each moment of presence, each experience noticed and valued and held, builds the memory system that was never properly scaffolded. Each time you witness your own experience, you do for yourself what perhaps no one did for you then. It's not too late. It's never too late to start noticing, to start mattering to yourself, to start building a history that you'll be able to access starting now. The past is gone. Some of it was never properly recorded. Some of it was actively erased. Some of it was simply what brains do. But the present is here, and the future is unwritten, and you get to decide what happens next. That's not nothing. That's everything.